assistance. This event is the third of a series of biannual public lectures that the School of Public Health has decided to support, and we call it our This is Public Health series. These lectures are to gain information about research so that we can all think critically about public health issues that people are facing locally and globally. As you know, public health aims to prevent injury and illness, protect health, and promote wellness for people in all communities. It's a multidisciplinary field that includes health, social sciences, biological sciences, and touches every aspect of our lives. So today is International Women's Day, where we celebrate the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women around the globe. According to the World Health Organization, women in developed countries live 24 years longer than those in developing nations. One of the issues facing these women is maternal health. We are very proud that one of our School of Public Health researchers is making an impact in the lives of these women. Maternal health is public health. So I'd like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Zubia Mumtaz. Dr. Mumtaz earned her MPH specializing in international health at the Harvard University School of Public Health. She also earned her PhD from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. She is an associate professor here in the School of Public Health, and her research focuses on the ways that culture and society impact women's health. Working largely in South Asia, her research focuses on the way that gender and social inequities impact health. And her work impacts policies, they impact maternal health services, and they help us understand how vulnerable women access such services. In 2010, Dr. Mumtaz received the Alberta Innovates Health Solutions Population Health Investigator Award, and more recently, in 2015, she and a colleague, Dr. Duncan Saunders, were one of 20 research teams funded by the Global Health Research Initiative, which will help resolve pressing challenges and better meet the primary care needs of mothers, newborns, and children in sub-Saharan African countries. Please welcome Dr. Zubia Mumtaz.
Thank you very much, Faye. Can you hear me at the back? Great. So, welcome, and thank you for taking time out of, I'm sure, very busy days to come here and celebrate International Women's Day with us. I will straight away start my presentation by showing you this beautiful picture of the Taj Mahal. I'm sure you all know that this is a symbol of love. It is also a very popular tourist destination, and a lot of us hope to visit this place one day. It's definitely on my bucket list. We also know that this beautiful structure made of white marble is actually a tomb. It was built by a grief-struck Mughal emperor in memory of his wife, Mumtaz Mahal, who died during childbirth. That's my namesake, by the way, but that's about the limit of our relationship. So really, it's not that well known that Mumtaz was a maternal mortality, and she died giving birth to her 14th child in the 14th year of her marriage. Apparently, this was a common occurrence those days, 500 years ago. The question is, as we gather here today to celebrate International Women's Day, to celebrate women's achievements in the political, economic, and the social arena, that have we made similar progress in saving women's lives globally? The question is, apparently not. Even today, in 2016, an estimated 300,000 women will die during childbirth. Just let that number sink in. It translates into about 800 deaths every day. which is about a woman dying every 2 minutes somewhere in the world. So in the couple of minutes that I have been standing here in front of you, somewhere a woman has died in childbirth. That also translates into 4 jumbo jets crashing every day. Can you imagine the hysteria if 4 jumbo jets full of perfectly healthy young women crashed every day? The question arises, why does this state of affairs continue to exist? Today we know a lot, but definitely more than what Emperor Sher Shah knew 500 years ago. We know what are the causes of maternal deaths. Bleeding is the biggest killer of women. Nearly 1/3 of women died because of bleeding. Eclampsia, in which high blood pressure is one symptom, is another common killer. Sepsis. And none of these conditions are medical mysteries. Any medical student will tell you how to control bleeding. And we have all the antibiotics we need to treat sepsis. Where we seem to have failed is not being able to translate what our clinical knowledge into health services for all women worldwide. It's not that we have not tried. In the past 30 to 40 years, numerous international policies have been developed with the aim to provide services to women worldwide. These included the Safe Motherhood in the 1980s, ICPD in the 1990s, the Millennium Development Goals in the 2000s, and now the Sustainable Development Goal Target 3.1. In fact, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that were launched in November last year, addressing maternal mortality is a standalone target 3.1. So we have been paying a lot of attention to the matter. So why have, in fact, addressing high maternal mortality was a key element of Stephen Harper's international engagement. And at the G8 meeting in Toronto in 2010, he essentially led the leaders who all agreed that reducing global maternal mortality rates was important. And they put aside large amounts of money to address this issue. And so now it's 2016, and what have we got to show for all this attention? Actually, we haven't done badly. Global maternal mortality rates have systematically and continuously declined over the past 40 years. And these numbers, by the way, are the number of maternal deaths per 100,000 population, 100,000 live births, sorry. And in fact, we have made significant progress. Between 1990 and 2013, we have reduced maternal mortality rate by 44%. So while this is really good news, I mean, I think we need to pat ourselves on the back, because clearly, I think the rates in 2013 shown here are probably some of the lowest in recorded history. But before we celebrate and shut the books down, it's worth noting that we failed to meet our own targets. The targets that the global community set for itself at the turn of the century in Millennium Development Goal number 5. The Millennium Development Goals were a set of goals that all the countries in the world signed up at the turn of the century that they hoped to achieve by 2015. And one of them, MDG 5, was a standalone target. And that was that we will, between 1990 and 2015, reduce maternal mortality rate by 75%. And not only did we not achieve our target, only 6 out of the 75 high-burden countries actually met the targets. So that is why you have not been hearing a lot of celebration around this matter. Had we met our targets, they would have been big fireworks. So what happened? I mean, why didn't we manage to meet our targets? It's not that we have not spent money. In fact, we have spent quite a bit of money. In 2013 alone, we spent $13 billion on global health projects addressing maternal mortality. Maternal health issues in general. I don't know whether this number is small or large, sufficient or insufficient, but it again is obviously, just looking at it, no small change. In fact, just over 1 year from between 2012 and 2013, this was a 34% increase. I don't know of many programs in the world which have this kind of increases on a year-to-year basis. And in 2015, Stephen Harper added to this amount by contributing another $3.5 billion. So money has been spent. And this is your money. As taxpayers, this is your money. So I guess in fact, you have a right and a responsibility to question what have you achieved, using your money. So what happened? I argue, and I don't think I'm the only one, this is now really been quite well recognized, that one of the key reasons why we failed to achieve our goal was that we failed to address the inequities. And these inequities exist at the country levels. We all know that some countries have much higher rates of maternal deaths than other countries do. And these countries are the well-known countries, they're largely in sub-Saharan Africa or in South Asia. So we have been focusing on these countries, but what is really astounding are the inequities that emerge and exist within these countries. So for example, the demographic health survey data showed that in Pakistan, in 2013, 96% of rich women, reported prenatal care, compared to just 37% of poor women. So if you're a rich woman in Pakistan, your access to care is as good as any woman in Edmonton. So it's really the poor women who are getting left behind. And this is across board. All the countries that I listed that show up in red here have this problem. But what I think might surprise you is that even countries that actually don't appear as red and look green on our charts actually have vast inequities within the populations. And a case in point is the United States of America. Our neighbor down south hasn't done such a great job in addressing inequities. Maternal deaths remain the 6th most common cause of death in women aged 20 to 34 in the US today. It clearly is not a matter of resources. It is one of the richest countries in the world, with probably the biggest army in the world. What it does have is vast inequities. So what apparently seems to have happened in all this time that we were busy at developing interventions and programs and strategies aimed at providing services, maternal health services in all the countries, especially the high burden countries. What we did not realize was that these services were being taken up disproportionately by the relatively wealthy populations. When people were working, if you're sitting in Washington or London or Ottawa, and you say that you're working in, say, in Kenya or in Bangladesh, you assume you're reaching the poor populations. And if you're working in Islamabad or in Dhaka or in some other capital, Nairobi, you assume that when you're working in a rural area, you're reaching the poor populations. This is a very simplistic approach to take. And that is where we went wrong. We were so busy developing interventions that we failed to take into account the inequities that exist and how our interventions then fed into the existing inequities to further create inequities in access to maternal health services. So what happened is that this particular group, the group that the ultra poor, socially marginalized, vulnerable populations is a group of people that got left behind. So in the remainder of my presentation today, I will discuss with you why we fail to address these inequities, what challenges continue to exist, and some potential solutions to address these inequities. In the interest of time, I will only focus on three areas: privatization of health services, our tendency to focus on magic bullets, and to take siloed approaches. This is not to say that there only exist these three reasons. There exist many more reasons, but I will only talk about these three reasons. So the first one, for some reason, worldwide, there is this creeping agenda to privatize health services. People seem to like the idea of private health services. And it's not just in the worldwide or in developing countries. Even in countries like Canada, where we have, I would like to believe, an established public sector system. But you know, this article came out in the Edmonton Journal just a couple of weeks ago, indicating the constant push for privatization of health services. The idea for private health services was aggressively floated by the World Bank in the 1990s. In 1992, there was a World Development Report by the World Bank in which it was very strongly argued that there is in no way that governments, and especially governments in poor countries, are going to be able to provide services, healthcare, and that we need to draw upon the private sector. But in the recent past, this baton has now been taken over by a whole new group of actors, the philanthro-capitalists. So while it's a new term, the philanthro-capitalism, the term doesn't exist in the dictionaries as yet. But it refers to a whole new group of actors that are playing a very big role in global health and maternal health specifically. And they include organizations such as the Bill and the Melinda Gates Foundation, the Buffett Foundation, and now the latest kid on the block, the Zuckerberg Foundation. These foundations, these philanthro-capitalists have become big players on the scene globally. And this slide kind of tells you how big a player they really are. So this was the latest data that I could access, 2013, and it shows that the Gates Foundation actually spent more money on global maternal health than did Canada. And it's worth noting that the Gates Foundation is essentially one individual, while there are nearly more than 33 million of us. So you can imagine that they have a huge say in what is done and what should be done. So, you know, in principle, there's nothing wrong with this idea, right? It's their money, and altruism is great. But there's an increasing concern that these organizations are actually not as altruistic as they might appear. So according to Mark Mazower, a professor of history at Columbia University, the philanthropic vision of the Gates Foundation seems to be largely based on the values of corporate America. So what he argues is that these organizations are rather than when they focus on maternal health and all these issues, they might end up, and in fact they probably are, looking after the interests of the multinational corporations they represent at the expense of social and economic justice. And this is done in one way is by pushing for privatization of health services. If you look at the request for proposals by the Gates Foundation, and they ask you to develop programs which they would consider funding, they use language such as revenue generating projects and market share and sales revenues in projects. This is very business language. It's not I'm not a business major in any way, or I don't know anything about business, but this looks to me really business. So, if you want to develop a business intervention and the Gates Foundation wants to fund it, that's great. Good for you. The question it becomes problematic when they claim to provide services to poor people. Because my research shows that the poor in Pakistan cannot just not afford to buy private services, they are actually even out of the market. So this nice picture reflects the rich people in Pakistan. And what I saw in my research, this is a caste-based society, a South Asian caste-based society. And at the top of the heap are the Chaudhurys and the Rajas. So this group of people have access to land. I mean, they are traditionally the land owners. And not only that, they have access to social capital, which enables them to access educational resources, employment opportunities. They are the group of people that populate the civil service, the army, the banking sector, the industrial sector, you name it. These are the people who live there, who are present there. At the bottom of the heap are the low caste commies. These are the group of people who are landless, and they are in fact born to perform low status, low remuneration jobs. These occupations not only pay very little, but they are actually tied to the land-owning class in very traditional bonds, social and economic bonds. They have to, they work all year round in the occupations that they're born to perform, and then they're paid in kind at the end of the year, at the time of the wheat harvest. So when you have this woman and her family working in a brick kiln, and they have to manufacture or build whatever they do, at least 1,000 bricks per day, and all they get in return is roof over their heads and 3 meals a day. What is the probability that she can save money to buy private services, health services? In fact, this group of people doesn't have cash. They're out of the market altogether. And I just want to highlight that I was in the field when this picture was taken. It was more than 45 degrees heat. I couldn't put my finger out there. It was like minus 45 degrees in Canada. But this woman and her family and her little baby were out there working from sunrise to sunset because they had to build 1,000 bricks. So the idea that we can provide private health services to this group of the population is misplaced, to say the least. In fact, there's emerging evidence that private health services may actually hurt. So this data was presented a couple of weeks ago in New York, and I was actually shocked by it. What they showed was that in one district in Pakistan, a surveillance system found that between 2009 and 2013, the maternal mortality rate actually increased. This increase was particularly shocking because the use of health facilities and maternal health services also increased. And 70% of the women were using health facilities, were delivering in a health facility, and yet they were dying. It emerged that all the increase in health facilities that had taken place was in the private sector. In fact, today, 80% of health care in Pakistan is in the private sector. So, the only conclusion that you can draw from such data is that, maybe these women were safer off staying at home rather than going and delivering in a facility in which the bottom line was $1 rather than quality of care. And my research shows that private health services tend to convert what is essentially a public good into a status symbol. And let me show you how that happens. This is a Louis Vuitton handbag, and these are Gucci sunglasses. And I will show you how private health, maternal health services have actually become the equivalent of these two items in Pakistan, or rather my village in which I work. Oh, sorry. When I did my field work, I found some really surprising findings, and I didn't know what to do with them. They just were not fitting in the traditional idea that the rich use private sector services and the poor will use public sector services. And then I came across the Hans model. This was in an economics journal. And Hans, when he developed this model, he basically developed it to understand how the population uses luxury items and which group of the population uses what type of luxury items. And his objective was to provide information to these manufacturers on how you can target different groups of the population. So on the x-axis, you have the have-nots and the haves on the y-axis, and on the x-axis you have need for status. So these are people who have low need for status to people who have a high need for status. You all understand what status is, right? It's just signaling who I am. What Hans showed in his research was that the population can really be divided up into 4 groups. One are the patricians. These are the old rich people. They are wealthy and they can afford to buy luxury items such as the Louis Vuitton handbag and the nice sunglasses. But they really don't need to signal their status, at least not to the other 3 groups. The only group that they signal their status to are the other patricians, and the signaling is very subtle. So Hans actually measured the signage of the Louis Vuitton. This is a Louis Vuitton handbag, and he showed that there was no way that at least someone like me would be able to identify that this is a Louis Vuitton handbag. I only know that this is a Louis Vuitton handbag because I got this picture from Louis Vuitton, the website, and of course it's Madonna who's using it, right? So, that's what it is. Madonna doesn't need to signal who she is. The second group of people are the parvenus. This is a Latin term that refers to people who have arrived. And so these are the newly rich people. And these people can afford to buy these luxury items, but they also have a very high need to signal their status. That look, here, I've arrived. So they use luxury items, but with very loud signage. So I don't know if you can make out, but you can actually see LV on that handbag. The third group of people are the posers. And the posers is a French term that refers to people who pretend to be what they are not. And so these are the people who are not wealthy. They cannot afford to buy these luxury items, but they just have a high need to demonstrate status. And so they are the ones who use the fake items. And this bag is supposed to be fake. I wouldn't know it's fake, but they said it's fake, so that's fine with me. The last group are the proletarians, and this is a term that is used to describe people of low social and economic class. And they are the people who cannot afford to buy these luxury items, and I guess so they go and buy Joe's, whatever it is, from Superstore. And but they can't afford it, and they either don't know or they couldn't be bothered to demonstrate status. What I found was that my complex pattern of health services use in my village actually fit in this 2x2 table. So at the top of the heap were the Rajas and the Chaudharis, and they tended to use public sector services, which was a big surprise to me. Because I would have thought that they would be the ones who would be using the private sector services. But you know, these people had access to some of the best services available out there, either by virtue of their employment benefits or simply by virtue of the social capital. It was the upper middle class, the Mirzas, who actually purchased private health care. And they could afford to buy it, but very importantly, they converted it into a status symbol. So really, you know, it's up to you to convert whatever you want into a status symbol, right? I mean, this bottle of water, if I want to, I can convert it into a status symbol. So that's what they did. I didn't understand what it was about this particular woman, Nigat. She was a midwife, but using her services was really the thing to do. The pressure really fell on the Mianes, the lower middle class people. They couldn't afford the private sector services, but they felt pressured to use it. You know, the kind of pressure keeping up with the Jones. And in fact, one woman, Aisha Bibi, her daughter-in-law Kishwar was pregnant, and Aisha Bibi wanted her to deliver in the nearby rural health center, which had a physician, and I thought she was pretty good. But of course, Kishwar wouldn't hear of it, and neither would her mother. My God, her mother was really mad. She said, "Is our daughter an orphan? Did you pick her off the streets that she's going to deliver in a public facility?" So Aisha Bibi borrowed money, and her daughter delivered in a facility of her choice, and then Aisha Bibi worked secretly as a cleaner to pay off her debt. That's the kind of pressure that exists. And then, of course, at the bottom of the heap were the low caste companies. They couldn't afford any services, and they depended on the unskilled traditional birth attendants. So clearly, here was an example that if we focus on privatizing health services, it's very easy to imagine that they will transform into a status symbol. Can you imagine that happening in Canada? You know, who would be the people, if they were private clinics, who would be the people who would be able to afford them? The rich. And the occasional times that we have seen a clinic sneak up, the last time I heard it was in Calgary, and you had to pay up $10,000 up front. So not many people can afford that. And those who can, it's going to become a status symbol. You know, can you imagine somebody saying, "Well, I have private health care," and the rest of us who don't, feeling small. Oh, sorry. So, yeah, I really went fast there. Huh? So the second item the second reason I'm going to talk about now that I believe creates the inequities that continue to exist is our tendency to focus on magic bullets. You know, there are no magic bullets out there. But for some reason, we tend to believe, and I just sometimes wonder, is it human nature to believe that if we could find that one single solution that will solve all our problems in the world? This is a great belief. At a certain level, it's impatience, right? We really want to solve our problem. And impatience is good. I really don't have a problem. We need to address these problems sooner rather than later. But if we continue to focus on looking just for that one solution to address what are otherwise very complex problems, we are going to miss the boat here. And let me share with you one example of magic bullets. Cell phones. That's the latest thing, right? The latest thing, the idea that cell phones and mobile technology, that somehow if we manage to provide information to women and where to seek services through cell phones, the problem will be solved. And foundations such as the Gates Foundation are lining up to fund such interventions. Yet, there is no evidence that they work. Over 500 mobile health studies have been conducted, and none of them have shown that cell phones single-handedly can impact maternal health. Are we surprised by that? No, I'm not. Because if you think about it, what is a cell phone? It's just another tool through which knowledge can be transmitted. It used to be that we used to fall upon the word of the mouth or the television or the newspapers to provide health education. So this is another example of a health education tool. And we all know that just knowing does not necessarily translate into action. We all know we are supposed to eat healthy. How many of us actually do it? So if health services don't exist, if a woman can't afford the health services, if she can't travel to the health facilities, knowledge alone is insufficient. And yet we keep on hoping that there is going to be that one magic bullet. According to Mesever, and he refers to the foundations, exaggerate what technology can do, ignore the complexities of social and institutional constraints, often waste vast sums that would have been better spent more carefully. And let me share with you an example in which I actually saw this firsthand. I was asked to evaluate a project which planned to provide cell phones, actually iPhones, to women and then provide them with messaging on when and where to seek services. The idea was to create demand. Thousands of women were given iPhone 4s. I don't know, there are not many teenagers in the room here, but they would have given arm and a limb to receive a free iPhone, right? What happened was, what do you think happened? Nothing. Nothing happened because these women refused to share their cell numbers with the project, citing privacy concerns. Nobody had thought of that. But what actually struck me was that we gave them the iPhones, but the fact is that they need to have a plan. And plans are not cheap. They're not cheap here and they're not cheap anywhere in the world. I don't know about you, but I find the plan fees quite expensive. And the woman that I showed you building blocks, do you think she can afford to pay for a plan? There's no way that she could be able to afford to that. So again, our interventions missed addressing the needs of that particular population. And we continue to contribute to the inequities. And so the last reason I'm going to talk about that leads to the inequities is siloed approaches. Just read this for a minute. Pretty powerful. This is the title of a paper written by Penny Ho that was published a few months ago. In this paper, she says, global health has fallen prey to developing conservative, simplistic, and negligent interventions that remain well short of delivering broad-reaching and sustainable outcomes. Pretty damning words. I mean, I kind of feel it, where is she coming from? So I'll tell you where she's coming from. Basically, what has happened is that we, the global maternal health community, has tended to focus on developing interventions that are simple, siloed, and vertical, and failed to take into account the complexities that actually exist on the ground. This slide is not to scare you in any way or try to understand what's going on, but just to show you how complex the interventions are. And by the way, this slide was just focusing on the complexities within a health system. They're not talking of factors that lay outside the health system. And my research shows that factors that impact service delivery are many. So in 2006, the government of Pakistan developed a midwifery training program. There was a lack of skilled birth attendants. right? That's what was understood. And so they thought we will take young women, recruit young women from villages, provide them with 18 months of training, and that's it. And then they were let loose. They expect, it was a huge countrywide effort, millions of dollars and billions of dollars were probably spent on establishing training programs for these women over in the country, nationally rather. And the idea was to train 12,000 midwives in 5 years. Well, after they graduated, their expectation was that they will go back to the home village and be home-based providers. So here you have a skilled birth attendant who is home-based in her village home, and that whenever a woman becomes pregnant in her catchment area, she will go and she will provide them with antenatal care, prenatal care, and when she's attend the childbirth, all in the woman's house. And that was designed with the idea that women in this context prefer to deliver at home, and within the context of seclusion that is a normative ideal. What I found when I went in about 6-7 years later after the launch of the program, that hardly any of these women were working. In fact, about 80% of them were not working at all. And of the 20% who were trying to work, they were really facing challenges. And one of the key challenges they were facing was that they were unable to provide services to what was supposed to be the key target. These women, the midwives, were designed to provide services to poor women who were using traditional birth attendants. But they were told that you have to charge these poor people for the service you provide. Remember, those poor women cannot afford private sector services, so they didn't use them. Instead, they continued using the traditional birth attendants, whom they paid in kind, and the rich women who the midwives were hoping to provide services to, because everybody needs to be paid for the work they do, they ended up providing services. The rich women wouldn't use them, because why would you do that, right? When you can go and use a well-established physician. That's the thing. The landscape wasn't blank. It wasn't a blank slate. There already existed providers. Just because they had a group of people providing traditional birth attendants, you couldn't just flood the place with a new cadre of providers. The third factor that kicked in was transport. The young women, these midwives, could not travel to these women's houses to provide services. This is a context characterized by seclusion and parda. And so a young woman of 22 cannot just walk in the lanes and go to people's houses. She had to be accompanied by at least an older woman during daytime and 2 men additionally at night. These are insecure rural contexts. So a woman who doesn't have access to these kind of human resources was unlikely to practice, and so they didn't work. However, all these complexities are completely ignored by our funding agencies and our interventions. If you look at the list of the projects that have been funded by the various foundations and taxpayer-funded organizations like Global Affairs Canada or USAID, each project is a standalone project. So there's one program in Ethiopia training midwives, there's another program in Kenya that is providing a maternal voucher scheme, and there's a third program in Bangladesh that's doing something else. Each program does one single thing at a time. This leads to what Penny House says, projectification. That instead of addressing the complexities and developing interventions that take into account all these issues, we end up having innumerable little projects which we believe, and a hope and a prayer, that somehow they will coalesce together in some grand way to reduce maternal mortality. It might happen, it might not happen. Sometimes it has worked out, and lots of times it has not worked out. So, at one level, I can hear you saying, but how can you expect someone to do the same thing, or everybody, one person, one organization to do one thing at one time, at the same time? And this makes perfect sense, to do one intervention at one time. These interventions are easy to understand by the funding agencies. They are easy to implement by the implementing agencies, and they are cheap to fund. Very importantly, they lead to the development of simple to measure indicators. But my argument is that if you are failing to reach the women that you're purporting to provide services to, it's meaningless. So, what are the solutions? And how can we address these complexities? The first thing I argue is that there is a need to acknowledge that there exists a group of people, the ultra poor, socially marginalized, and very vulnerable group, that for the large number of us are invisible. Not only are they invisible to people internationally, they are invisible to even local providers. When I have tried to present the existence of these people, in Islamabad, I have actually experienced quite a pushback. First, the caste system doesn't exist. This is a Muslim country. We don't have the caste system. Secondly, when I talk about the existence of these people, it's very easy to talk of poor people as the other. You don't see. But it's very difficult to realize that these poor people are poor because of you. So the bureaucrats kind of, become very defensive. The first time I presented these findings, I was lucky. I had Director General Health who was from a village, and he bought my ideas. And so once the Director General bought, everybody kind of, said yes. But it's taken me time to kind of convince that, you have to address the needs of these people. But this realization needs to come to us as well, the people sitting internationally. And to a certain extent, it has. The Sustainable Development Goal number 10 actually aims to address the inequities. But now we need to make sure that we walk the talk. The second thing that we need to address is that we need to develop services that are sensitive to the special needs of these group of people. And I use the word special needs because I really believe that this group does have special needs. They need to be provided services that are financially sustainable, financially enabling for them, as well as you need to provide them with respectful care, because some of these identities are quite stigmatizing. And we need to provide them free care. I know this sounds not new for somebody in Canada, but it is quite a revolutionary idea if you're sitting in the US. What happens is that countries that have achieved success in reducing the maternal mortality rates have done so by providing free care. Historically, these have been the Western countries, Canada, Sweden, all the Nordic countries. And like I told you, the US is still not there yet. It doesn't provide free care. More, in the past 100 years or so, or 50 years or so, Cuba, Sri Lanka are the countries that achieved similar success, again by providing free care. And very recently, in the last 10, 15 years, Rwanda and Nepal have made remarkable success by providing free care. So even if you cannot provide free care to everybody, there is definitely a need to develop a social safety net for this special group of people. And this social safety net needs to be systematic and at the national level. Developing projects that provide voucher schemes for 5 years, and then once the funding runs out, everybody packs their bags and goes home onto the latest flavor of the month project is not the way we need to go this. We need to be systematic about it. The third thing, or the fourth thing that we need to do is that we need to start developing complex systems thinking. we need to make sure, what apparently happens right now is that we like the idea of developing simple singular interventions. They're easy, they're comfortable, they're what everybody does. But we need to go beyond that. There is an emerging literature that is starting to talk of complex thinking and how we need to start addressing these things in a much more complex manner. But this is that the funders now need to step up, because funders really lead the tune. If a lot of implementing agencies write proposals that are required by the funders. So if the funders start requesting for complex interventions, the implementing agencies will follow suit. But for that to do, the funders need to bring in some serious changes in how they fund projects. Currently, all projects in at least Global Affairs Canada and I believe USAID are assessed by in-house bureaucrats. It really is not fair to expect this small group of bureaucrats to have all the knowledge out there. So they need to change the way they fund, the way they review projects by drawing upon peer reviewer expertise. So what is the take-home message today for the audience? The first one I would say is that we need to continue championing the cause of greater social justice in matters of maternal health. That we need to continue talking about this matter. We need to remain vigilantly aware that poor women in some of the poorest countries in the world remain voiceless, and that you and I are actually their only voice. And thirdly, we need to hold accountable all the stakeholders in maternal health. We need to hold accountable our elected representatives. We need to hold accountable the bureaucrats who fund the projects with our money. And you need to hold accountable people like me, your researchers. Are you doing what I said, what is useful research? So, I guess that's it. 3 take-home messages. And I would like to thank our sponsors, Prominent Homes, for funding this presentation, and my graduate student, Alyssa Ferguson, for bearing with me as I brainstormed on these ideas. And of course, all the people in the communications group who worked very hard to make this day happen. So, thank you very much.
So I want to thank Zubia for